In the annals of Australian crime, one name emerges as a stark reminder of a tragedy that left an indelible mark on the nation's history. Come with us as we step back in time to delve into the haunting tale of Anita Cobby, a young nurse whose life was brutally taken in 1986. As she walked home from Blacktown railway station, shortly before 10 p.m. one fateful February night, she was snatched from the streets, subjected to unspeakable horrors through sexual assault and ultimately met a tragic end. A mere 2 days after her disappearance, Cobby's lifeless body was discovered on a farm in Prospect. The ensuing investigation led to the apprehension of 5 men, all of whom would later be convicted of her abduction, rape, and murder. The shockwaves generated by this heinous act reverberated throughout Australia, forever reshaping the trajectory of its criminal justice system. Yet, beyond the darkness that shrouded this crime, Anita's story stands as a testament to resilience, unity, and an unwavering quest for justice. In this video, we peel back the layers to reveal the heart-wrenching intricacies of the Anita Cobby case, shedding light on the relentless endeavors to bring her perpetrators to account and examining the enduring impact of her legacy on a nation resolute in its stand against violence. This is the story of Anita Cobby, a name etched in history, an emblem of hope amidst tragedy. Anita Cobby, born with the full name Anita Lorraine Lynch Cobby, entered the world on November 2, 1959, in Sydney, Australia. Her upbringing unfolded within the tight-knit embrace of a family nestled in the western suburbs of Sydney, and her early years were marked by a sense of contentment and normalcy. Anita, the youngest among 4 siblings, exuded warmth and compassion from her earliest days. Her formative years were spent at Parramatta Marist High School, where her commitment to academics was unwavering, and where she forged enduring friendships that would accompany her through life. During her teenage years, Anita found herself in the realm of beauty pageantry, even achieving victory as she was crowned Miss Western Suburbs pageant winner in November 1979. Her striking looks and potential as a model held promise, but destiny had a different path in store for her. In a heartfelt decision, she chose to follow in her mother's footsteps and pursue a career in nursing, exemplifying her dedication to a life of caring and compassion. Anita met her future husband, John Cobby, while studying for her nursing degree. Recalling their initial encounter, John reminisced, "Just these ringlets of hair everywhere, God, she was beautiful, and I thought far too good for me." Over time, he summoned the courage to approach her and was pleasantly surprised to find her interest reciprocated. Their inaugural date unfolded at a Lebanese restaurant in Surrey Hills, marking the commencement of an inseparable bond. After more than a year of dating, John asked Anita to marry him. Soon afterward, their shared joy knew no bounds as Anita became pregnant, and both eagerly anticipated the impending journey into parenthood. Tragically, a few weeks after sharing the news of her pregnancy, Anita endured a heartbreaking miscarriage. In the midst of their mutual devastation, they comforted each other with the assurance that another opportunity for parenthood would come their way, steadfast in their commitment to building a family. On the 27th of March, 1982, they exchanged vows in what John described as a typical Australian wedding with nothing pretentious about it. They had no honeymoon, instead renting a house in Rockdale and living a life they both loved, which involved dining out, concerts, and their 2 beautiful dogs. A pivotal moment arose when John unexpectedly won $10,000 at the horse races. He handed Anita the reins of decision-making, and her heart's desire beckoned her to embark on a voyage of travel. Together, John and Anita ventured to the United States, crafting cherished memories during the journey of a lifetime. Upon their return to Australia in mid-1985, John was prepared to settle into a life of work and family building. Anita, on the other hand, felt restless. There was more traveling she wanted to do, and it became clear that they were at different stages in their lives and wanted different things. They decided to take a break, despite how much they loved each other. Anita returned to her family home in Blacktown, and John to his family in Rockdale. They spoke daily, and after 6 weeks, they discussed buying an apartment and moving back in together. On the evening of February 2, 1986, Anita told her mother over breakfast that she would be returning home later than usual that night due to plans for dinner with friends from work. John had asked if she would like to see him that night, but Anita explained she already had plans. After finishing her shift at Sydney Hospital at 3 p.m., Anita met up with friends for dinner in Redfern. After dinner, one of her friends offered to drop Anita at Central Station, and she accepted. Her train departed Central Station at 8:48 p.m. and arrived just before 10 p.m. in Blacktown, a suburb in western Sydney. Typically, the 26-year-old would call her father from the station, and he would come to pick her up. However, on this particular evening, all the nearby payphones happened to be out of order, and no taxis were available at the taxi rank. Faced with a warm summer night, Anita made the decision to walk home. It was 10 p.m. when a group of 5 men pulled up beside her in a stolen car, grabbed her, and dragged her into the vehicle kicking and screaming. A teenage boy, along with his younger sister and mother, was drawn outside by the piercing screams emanating from the street in front of their house. As they stepped out, a horrifying scene unfolded before them. Anita Cobby forced into the attacker's car. The boy ran across the road to help, but the car drove off before he reached it. Dejected but determined, he hurried back home and immediately dialed the police, providing a detailed account of the distressing sight he had just witnessed. Minutes later, their concerned neighbor and his girlfriend returned home and were told of the abduction. Driven by a sense of urgency, they embarked on a mission to locate the car in question. They eventually drove down Reen Road, now known as Peter Brock Drive, Prospect, and stopped by the now empty Holden, where the man used a spotlight to search the adjacent paddock. Seeing nothing in the paddock and believing the car he was looking for was a different model Holden, he returned home. The attackers later stated that they had hidden in the long grass to avoid the spotlight and waited for the man to leave. Once inside the vehicle on Newton Road, Cobby had been commanded to remove her clothing, but she adamantly resisted, pleading with her attackers to release her. She mentioned her marital status and that she was on her period, in an attempt to deter them. Despite her pleas, her assailants subjected Cobby to a brutal onslaught of punches, resulting in a broken nose and both cheekbones. They then coerced her into performing sexual acts on all 5 men. Following this horrifying ordeal, the assailants made a stop at a service station, using money pilfered from Cobby's purse to purchase fuel. Cobby was subsequently driven down Reen Road to an isolated paddock, all the while being forcibly held inside the car. During this journey, she suffered repeated acts of rape and endured continuous physical assaults by her 5 attackers. Upon reaching the secluded paddock, they dragged the severely battered Cobby along a barbed wire fence, where they left her, subjecting her to further sexual and physical abuse for an extended period. According to John Travers' recorded confession, one of the attackers, he became increasingly concerned that Cobby could potentially identify them due to having seen their faces and heard their names. Consequently, he persuaded the other assailants to take her life. Pressured by the group, Travers ultimately inflicted a fatal injury by slashing her throat, nearly decapitating her. When Grace Lynch awoke the following morning, she observed that Anita was absent from her bed. Given that Anita occasionally spent nights at a friend's place when she had been out late, Grace held on to the hope that they would receive word from her in the morning and didn't initially harbor grave concerns. However, as afternoon descended, the hospital made an alarming call, inquiring about Anita's whereabouts as she had not reported for her 1 p.m. shift. It was at that disconcerting moment when Grace's intuition signaled that something was amiss. Joined by her husband, Gary, and Anita's sister, Catherine, Grace initiated a series of phone calls to friends and family, fervently seeking any information about Anita's whereabouts. By 8 p.m. that evening, they reached out to John. John happened to be sharing a meal with his father and a friend, and the restaurant phone summoned his attention. Upon learning that Anita was nowhere to be found, panic gripped him. Without hesitation, he abruptly left the dinner table and raced to Anita's residence in Blacktown. The next day, John and Anita had made plans to go to Shelley Beach on the Central Coast, so John did just that. He hoped that maybe she would be there waiting for him. John listened to the radio, thinking about how just months ago they'd sat alongside each other, singing and laughing. At the same time, Detective Sergeant Graham Rosetta and Senior Constable Hugh Dundas drove down a dirt back road where 3 uniformed police were waiting for them. The 2 men were immediately briefed by Tony Casamatis. A young woman had been found dead in a paddock. They did not have an identification, but she was between 18 and 30 and there was an incredible loss of blood. She was completely naked and the only item they had to use for identification was a Russian wedding ring on her finger. The brutalized woman lay on her stomach, face down. Her left arm was under her body and her right arm under her head. Her eyes were open, vacant, staring. She was surrounded by a large congealed pool of blood. The cuts to her throat were easy to see even though she lay face down. Detective Sergeant Ian Kennedy was one of the police officers called to the paddock on a hot summer day. He talked to Detective Paul Davies and Detective Sergeant Constable Phil Gaspard, who were also working on the case. These officers remembered being at Blacktown Station when Constable Murphy took Gary Lynch's missing person report about Anita. They were confident they had located her. Whilst John was still on his way to Shelley Beach, suddenly, the song playing was interrupted by a news broadcast. John still remembers the words vividly. A naked body of a young woman has been found in a paddock at Prospect in Western Sydney. Police are yet to identify her. John never made it to Shelley Beach. Instead, he turned around and drove straight to Blacktown. The police somberly presented the family and John with a Russian wedding ring, the sole possession recovered from the victim. It bore a heavy significance: it was Anita's. The chilling truth would gradually emerge. On the night of February 2nd, Anita fell victim to a harrowing ordeal. She was subjected to a brutal gang rape and ultimately met her tragic end at the hands of 5 men. This heinous crime would go down in history as one of the most horrific acts ever committed in Australia. However, it wasn't just Anita who perished that dreadful night. A part of John's spirit withered away as well. He often reflects that February 4th, the day he learned of her fate, stands as the darkest and most agonizing day of his life. In the early stages of the investigation, John found himself in the unwavering glare of suspicion. The probing questions from the investigating officer pushed him against a wall, the officer determined to extract a confession. Under the mounting pressure, John eventually uttered, "Yep. I did it. Must have." Yet, the pieces of the puzzle didn't align. Investigators harbored a deep conviction that there was more than one perpetrator involved, and the circumstances surrounding the crime didn't fit the profile of a crime of passion. This was something altogether distinct. Before long, accumulating evidence conclusively exonerated John from any involvement in Anita's tragic fate. During the somber funeral held a week later, Anita's parents maintained a stoic silence. John, on the other hand, struggled to remain upright throughout the service. As her casket was carried out of the church, he cried out, "Don't take her away from me. Please. Don't take her away." John had never been inclined toward heavy drinking and had a strong aversion to drugs. However, everything changed the moment he received the devastating news of Anita's passing. Following the funeral, John expressed his sole desire, to feel hurt and die. Just one day after Anita's funeral, John made the decision to relocate to the United States. He turned to heroin, cocaine, and excessive drinking as a means of coping with his overwhelming grief. According to medical records, he consumed copious quantities of pills, sedatives, hypnotics, pain relievers, and tranquilizers, in addition to a daily bottle of scotch. John's mental state deteriorated significantly, and he later revealed that his choice to move abroad was driven by the relentless media attention. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of Anita, intensifying his anguish. The Lynches displayed unwavering stoicism throughout the emotionally devastating event, and the outpouring of public sympathy paralleled the later tragedy of schoolgirl Ebony Simpson's rape and murder, a few years hence. Amidst this seething collective grief, the police, the press, and the public found themselves united in outrage. Public opinion swung heavily toward the reintroduction of capital punishment, reflecting the depth of anger and sorrow. Then, a breakthrough emerged. On February 6, the New South Wales state government offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the capture of Anita's killers. February 9 saw the police reenacting Anita's movements on the night of her disappearance, striving to jog the memories of travelers or potential witnesses. Constable Debbie Wallace, clad in attire similar to Anita's, embarked on the 9:12 p.m. train to Blacktown. Detectives meticulously interviewed passengers, presenting them with photos of Anita, while Constable Wallace traversed the length of the train during the journey. During this time, the police received a call from an individual following up on a report they had made on the night of Anita's abduction. A family had been eyewitnesses to a chilling scene where a woman was forcibly dragged into a white and gray Holden Commodore around 9:50 p.m. One of the witnesses instinctively rushed toward the car in an attempt to aid the woman, but the vehicle swiftly sped away. John McGahey, the witness's older brother, was promptly informed of this disturbing incident upon his return home. He and his brother Paul decided to embark on a drive in the vicinity, hoping to spot the car John had described. As they traversed the desolate road, unbeknownst to them, Anita was being subjected to unspeakable horrors mere meters away. The incident witnessed by John McGahey aligned with the time frame of Anita's final moments, leading the police to presume that this was, indeed, the abduction of Anita. Following a tip-off from a police informant concerning a stolen vehicle, the police commenced their search for John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and the Murphy brothers, given their prior histories of violence and Travers's reputation for carrying a knife. On February 21, police located and apprehended Travers and Murdoch at Travers's uncle's residence, and Les Murphy at Travers's house. Murdoch and Murphy faced charges related to stolen cars but were subsequently released on police bail. Travers, who had confessed to car theft but had provided conflicting statements about the murder, was detained in police custody. While in custody, John Travers made a seemingly innocuous request for a friend to bring him cigarettes. Little did he know that this request would become his undoing. The phone number was handed to the investigating police, who promptly contacted the woman. Despite her fear of Travers, she agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Meeting with an officer, she divulged crucial details about Travers's sadistic and violent background. This courageous woman, known as Mrs. X, engaged in a conversation with Travers, during which he confessed to the gruesome crime. Mrs. X returned to converse with him, equipped with a recording device, ultimately securing a confession. Subsequently, 5 men were arrested and charged in connection with Anita's murder. The police received praise for their rapid response in capturing all the suspects involved. In just 22 days, from the time of the murder to the apprehension of all suspects. The 5 individuals facing charges had amassed more than 50 prior convictions collectively, spanning a wide array of offenses. Their rap sheets included armed robbery, assault, larceny, car theft, breaking and entering, drug use, escaping lawful custody, receiving stolen goods, and even rape. John Travers. John Raymond Travers, the eldest among 8 siblings, was regarded as the ringleader of the gang responsible for the heinous attack. Michael Murdoch. Michael Murdoch, a childhood friend and criminal associate of Travers, had spent a significant portion of his youth in juvenile detention facilities, where he endured incidents of sexual assault. During this period of imprisonment, he wrote to politicians, seeking protection from such abuses. The Murphys. Les, Michael, and Gary Murphy, siblings within a large Irish family comprising 9 children, also found themselves accused of the crime. Michael Murphy. At the time of the murder, Michael was 33 years old, holding the distinction of being the eldest among the 9 Murphy children. He had been sent to live with his grandmother at the age of 12. Gary Murphy. Gary Murphy, 5 years junior to Michael, faced challenges in his schooling due to a hearing impairment, eventually leaving prematurely to seek employment. He was recognized as a capable and diligent worker before the crimes, and by and large, people found him likable. Gary's intense fascination with automobiles led to him facing several charges related to automotive theft in the years leading up to the murder. Les Murphy. The youngest of the Murphy siblings, Les, was notorious for having the most volatile temperament. Even before being accused of Anita Cobby's murder, he had appeared in children's court on numerous occasions, facing charges related to various theft offenses. Les was 24 years old at the time of the murder. The trial commenced in Sydney on March 16, 1987. Prior to the official commencement of proceedings, Travers altered his plea to guilty. The Sun, a Sydney newspaper, featured a front-page headline on the day the trial kicked off, boldly proclaiming "Anita Murder Man Guilty," accompanied by a prominent image of Travers. In a subsequent article within the same publication, Michael Murphy's recent escape from Silverwater Correctional Center was detailed, along with a rundown of his criminal convictions. This turn of events led to the jury being discharged. The trial involving the remaining members of the gang unfolded over a span of 54 days. The defense for these men pivoted on persuading the jury of their limited involvement in the assault and murder. On June 10, 1987, a verdict was reached, finding all 5 men accused of the murder guilty. Subsequently, on June 16, 1987, they were all handed life sentences in the Supreme Court of New South Wales, with no possibility of parole. Justice Maxwell characterized the crime as one of the most horrifying physical and sexual assaults. This was a calculated killing done in cold blood. The executive should grant the same degree of mercy they bestowed on their victim. John shared with the Daily Telegraph, 3 decades after the murder, the enduring burden of guilt, stating, "I blamed myself for her dying and still do. I should have been with her." His paranoia was relentless, fearing that people would recognize him or wrongly accuse him. This anxiety drove him to extreme measures like shaving his head and changing his hair color, anything to conceal his identity. Crippling nightmares haunted John, featuring scenarios where he sought vengeance against Anita's assailants. He acknowledged the lasting impact of the tragedy, affecting not only his life but also the lives of his family and Anita's family. His anguish took a physical toll as well. John found himself hospitalized in the United States with a broken foot, unable to recall how the injury had occurred. The final straw came when a journalist tracked him down in Michigan, shattering his cherished anonymity. It was then that John decided to return to Sydney. Upon his return in 1987, John made the significant decision to change his last name. He felt that the name, Cobby, had become indelibly linked to Anita's murder, prompting him to adopt the surname, Francis. John embarked on a career as a psychiatric nurse at Long Bay Correctional Center back in Australia. While he denied any direct connection to Anita's killers, his sister held a different belief. She thought he was driven by a desire to know their whereabouts and potentially seek revenge. Reporter Steve Pinnells, speaking to News Corp, revealed that John had deliberately avoided learning the names of Anita's murderers, a choice that had defined his life. John refrained from attending memorial services and only made his first visit to her grave a decade after her tragic death, in 1997. In April 2016, alongside his son Daniel, John took a significant step by returning to the Department of Births, Deaths, and Marriages to revert his name back to John Cobby.